Hi, and welcome to the seminar titled The New Paradigm of Relationships in Social Media. My name is Jákup Brúsá. I'm from the Faroe Islands. I work as a digital marketing consultant with a background in digital communication and media. I'm also part of the church leadership in my home church, and I'm also one of the youth leaders at the church, and I've been involved in youth ministry for many years now. How are social media changing our way of interacting with one another and our understanding of relationships? This is one of the things we will investigate in this seminar and look a bit closer at the challenges and opportunities that this presents to missions and discipleship today and in the future. Now, a disclaimer, I am not a psychologist. A psychologist's perspective would be equally interesting on this topic. My background is in digital communication and marketing, and I've been active in youth ministry for many years. And the younger generation is leading the way in this new paradigm, new understanding of relationships in the age of social media. To some of us, this is a new paradigm of relational interaction, but to the younger generation, it is the paradigm. It's all they know. Social media is so pervasive and ubiquitous in their everyday that it's second nature to them to interact with each other through chat, short videos, with emojis, etc. So I'm approaching this topic from this perspective based on my experience and observations, along with some ideas from research and scripture. Now, I don't think a negative dystopian view benefits the debate, one that, I think it's terrible how everyone's glued to their screens these days. We need to accept the reality that it is today, even if we think it was better before, and look for opportunities to connect with people and bring the gospel to the world in the age that we live in. Now, I'm sure there are many points to be made from all kinds of perspectives, and the live discussion afterwards will be a good chance for you to share your thoughts. So today's reality is this: more and more of life has become digital. More work is now remote, more friends are now made in online communities, more people play video games than play all sports combined. And if we look at this interesting statistic from the Global Web Index, Europeans are spending an average of 2 hours per day multi-networking across an average of 7 social network and messaging apps. And this is up with 40 minutes from 2012, 40 minutes more than in 2012. And the younger generations on even more platforms, as we can see here. The generational difference in the number of platforms, social media platforms that people are using. Now, the number of platforms is ever growing and our attention is being increasingly fragmented. But at the same time, we find ourselves in a different context than 20 years ago. You could say that the basic amenities of life today are food, shelter, and the smartphone. We can't live without it. People are the same, our needs are the same, but technology has changed how we interact with one another. But is it all good or bad? People often tend to romanticize the past, that everything was better before. But I think this is an oversimplification because we also tend to forget the complexities of the past. So let's take a closer look under the hood of our social context today at what challenges this brings, but also what opportunities it brings to us. These past 2 years have been unique. The coronavirus has forced many of us to stay home and find connection through social media. And big tech has certainly followed the trend as well, with all the tools that we see emerge. Remote meetings and school classes have been conducted on Zoom or Teams, hanging out with live video on Facebook Rooms or Discord, social audio on Clubhouse, which is kind of like podcast and radio reinvented, but with a social element to it as well. And Apple and Facebook now offering shared video experiences, where you can watch a video or listen to music with others while on a video call. And now I was doing this just the other day with a very close friend of mine that I don't see that often. We were on a video call together, and then we could, on Messenger, we could watch some funny videos that we could laugh at together and have a shared experience while also having our video conversation on and talking. You could say that social media and new technologies have reduced social isolation, at least in these past 2 years. Now, COVID will end, but the shift to creating and cultivating community online will stay with us. This is a main point. The shift to creating and cultivating community online will stay with us. And if the church cannot embrace this new reality, we will find ourselves losing our impact on all generations, not just the young. Just these past few weeks, we've had to cancel youth meetings at our church due to another COVID outbreak in the Faroe Islands. So we tried using Facebook Rooms to create a more interactive experience. I know you can live stream that many have done. We don't have that big of a group, so we tried using a more interactive experience. Facebook Rooms allows for up to 50 people to join in a big video call, where everyone can turn on their cameras, and it becomes a bit chaotic when everyone talks at the same time, but then you just ask everyone to mute their microphone so that one person can talk. Like you would in a room where you just shush everyone to be quiet while one person talks. And then we were also joined by a couple that part of our church that is on missions work in a Muslim country that could share some of their experiences from their missions trip as if they were in the same room with us, even though they were abroad. Another example, I joined a Discord channel the other day, a popular online messaging and community platform, with 10 others from my youth group. Now, it's kind of like an online hangout place. A few of them were playing Minecraft together while the rest were watching and also just chatting and talking together. And some had their camera on, some didn't. Everyone could just talk and hear each other. Hanging out online, also a different way to meet and hang out. Also, a friend shared how she was connecting with people on Yodel, another platform, where they were confiding in her with problems so she could help. And Yodel is a platform where everyone's anonymous. So they were anonymous and she was anonymous. So it's not a personal relationship as such, but a relationship in that moment where she could help them in a very difficult situation. Online gaming is also huge. An opportunity that a gamer called Rhino Crunch, with more than 1 million subscribers on YouTube, uses. He plays Fortnite and other games and always wraps up the game with a word from Scripture and a testimony about Jesus Christ. I think it's a really powerful way to meet people that probably never come into a church. So I think the obvious point to make is this, that social media is not a good replacement for offline relationships, but an excellent supplement. It's a good extra. One of the key benefits is this. Social media enables us to maintain relationships in a globalized world. It takes away geographical barriers. It introduces us to a multitude of global and local niche communities. It helps us to meet like-minded people, people that share our interests, that we might not find in the town or village we come from, or in our class at school, or in our workplace. An example also is that I made some friends in the US that I don't consider close friends, as we have only met a few times at a conference that I've attended, and we work in the same field. But by connecting on social media, I can see what's going on in their lives, and they can see what's going on in mine. And occasionally I can write with them to see how they are, and if I was in the neighborhood, I would certainly go and visit them and hang out with them. Let's call them occasional friends. Not a new concept as such, but with social media we can keep much better and regular contact with more people. Facebook recently announced that they've changed their name to Meta, as they are in the process of building a virtual world of so-called metaverse. And Microsoft has announced the same thing, and they're putting big money into this. And the overall goal is to create an enhanced sense of presence. An enhanced sense of presence that removes geographical barriers to social interaction. This is a very interesting move into the future, and the next steps of, I believe we're going to see, of the evolution of the internet. And this is something that removes geographical barriers to social interaction even more. Now, it could enable us to connect more across distances, but it could also further bleed out the life of our physical communities. as we spend an ever higher percentage of our time in staring at screens and interacting with virtual worlds. But if we strike a healthy balance, not neglecting the people across the table or in our physical, that are nearby, this poses an immense opportunity. Imagine attending a virtual church when you don't have any church nearby, or when church gatherings might be illegal where you are. And I don't just mean just live streaming a service somewhere on YouTube. I mean, you put on these goggles or the glasses and you are virtually in the room with someone next to you, and on your left and on your right, that basically are on the other side of the world, but you're in a virtual room together. We've moved towards being able to sustain a much larger network with the potential to reach much further. However, with the potential, even with online media, we can only sustain so many relationships. Professor Robin Dunbar, anthropologist and psychologist, makes a very interesting point in that real, as opposed to casual, relationships require at least occasional face-to-face interaction to maintain them. So our capacity for close relationships has not increased, but the opportunity for building more casual or occasional relationships is better than ever. And geography is no longer a barrier. But there is a challenge, and it brings me to my next point here. Is this a crisis of intimacy? Intimacy is limited on social media. And this is no surprise, I guess, but there's an interesting point to be made here. Deborah Chambers, she's a professor of media and cultural studies. She's done a lot of research into this topic and writes that growing evidence suggests that social media is changing our ideas about intimacy and friendship. She calls it a crisis of intimacy, hence this term that I used on this slide. Now, she observes that friendship has extended from a term that describes personal and intimate to include network and community. So the main advantage I just mentioned in our ability to maintain a larger network of casual friendships can also be a disadvantage in the lack of close friendships for people spending most of their time in the online world. So we might experience a future generation that thirsts for real intimacy like never before. Maybe we're seeing it already today. Maybe we'll see it even more in the future. Because nothing beats face-to-face fellowship. No question about that. There's nothing like being able to look each other directly in the eyes, read each other's body language, shake each other's hand, feel the warmth of a hug. Now we are doing this conference online. It would be 1,000 times better if we could meet in person and we could actually stand in the same room and talk together. But this certainly is an excellent alternative when that isn't possible. The Apostle John knew the value of communicating the gospel in writing across a geographical distance. He wrote one of the Gospels, he wrote 3 letters in the New Testament, but he also knew that face-to-face communication was the best. And I think these 2 passages are just really powerful. The second letter is written to a church, and he ends with this: I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. And the third letter is written to an individual named Gaius, and he says almost exactly the same. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon and we will talk face to face. Of course, John didn't have email or Snapchat. It took weeks or perhaps months for communication to go back and forth. But I would argue though that intimacy is not necessarily absent on social media. Of course, it's not the same as when you're sitting across the table physically, but I wouldn't say it's absent. Intimacy is just as much about being mentally and emotionally present, giving your full attention to someone. And this is not necessarily dependent on being in the same room. And with richer communication channels, with video, audio, and even virtual rooms, we may be able to meet people with intentional intimacy because we are interested in them, even though we are physically apart. I think this is a key thing for us in discipleship and missions in the future. Intentional intimacy when we are physically not able to be together in the same room. We can be emotionally and mentally present or invested into listening what they have to say. So here's another challenge. Social media keeps people close, but not too close. Social network sites are said to be increasing the number of friends that people have and strengthening ties between families, especially those separated by migration. Yet, at the same time, new media technologies are being blamed for a decrease in close, genuine bonds. Now, like I said before, our perception of intimacy is changing, and we might see a crisis of intimacy as such. Some argue that heavy social media users are more socially isolated. But Deborah Chambers, that I quoted earlier on, she writes that despite widespread anxieties about the impact on traditional social ties, emerging findings indicate that social networks have become important for cultivating personal relationships. In fact, research contests the view that heavy social media users are more isolated than occasional or non-users. So crisis might be a very strong word to use here. If it's a crisis of intimacy that we're seeing, there's certainly a change in our perception of intimacy, as I noted earlier, in moving from personal and intimate towards network and community. Different. Daniel Miller, professor of anthropology, he refers in his book, Social Media in an English Village, a very interesting book, to a Goldilocks strategy where platforms such as Facebook allow people in English communities to keep connections at exactly the right distance. Neither too hot nor too cold, but just right. Hence, this point that I'm making here. This suggests that people avoid the risk of being vulnerable to others, or like to escape from the reality of everyday life. I mean, we see this as well in how social media gives us more control over how we present ourselves, how it allows us to define our own identity in what we post. Look at, picture perfect and Instagram, all that stuff. You put filters on your photos. You display only the positive. Although there is a trend towards being more authentic and showing the downside of your life. But still, it's always moderated. You show only what you want to show. They're, suggesting a lack of authenticity and depth in online relationships and an arm's length distance in intimacy. You could say that the word friend has lost some of its depth because before Facebook we all knew what a friend was. Or did we? One thing that hasn't changed is that relationships have always been categorized or ranked from deep to superficial. We've always put on a facade to other people while we may let a few people in. There are those you trust a bit and there are those you trust a lot. And friends are also categorized by context. School friends, work friends, football or hobby friends, occasional friends. My point is, people are the same, but our habits have changed. We still need intimacy and closeness. We still pretend and put on a mask in front of other people. We still like to keep people at an arm's distance if we don't want them to see the mess in our life. Social media is only a medium where we can hide our messy life even better. We can hide behind a screen. We can moderate our life even better because we don't have our body language when we're physically across each other doesn't reveal as much. Or we can also connect with people that understand us on the other side of the world when we cannot find good friends nearby. So there are pitfalls and there are incredible positives as well. Social media also enables us to sustain relationships when we cannot meet physically. Now, in southeastern Turkey, for example, among the Kurdish and Arab communities, social media facilitate the bridging of social groups such as family and tribe separated by migration. In strict Muslim cultures, end-to-end encrypted messaging apps like WhatsApp protect users communicating with others. For example, about Christian faith, people searching for answers, people with an interest in knowing more about who Jesus is. It could also be good friends that live in different countries, or occasional friendships that may be helpful in particular seasons of life. So, to come to a conclusion for this, as churches and ministries, we can reach out to so many people through social media, but only to a certain level of intimacy. So we also need to get better at building bridges into the physical world where face-to-face interaction is part of the relationships we build, where possible. But as mentioned in my examples before, we can reach unreached people like never before, right from your living room or on your phone, wherever you are. Live and synchronous communication with someone seeking to know more about Jesus Christ. Even with video or as a Bible study group meeting in a virtual room. Because we can't always meet face to face. And that's where this is such an immense opportunity. We can't always meet face to face. So let me repeat my point from earlier on. COVID will end, but the shift to creating and cultivating community online will stay with us. And if the church cannot embrace this new reality, we will find ourselves losing our impact on all generations, not just the young. We need to meet people where they are, some say. Well, they are online, so let's go. Thank you very much.